Hello, everyone. Welcome to Euphoria and our panel on trans joy in TTRPGs. Uh, my lovely panelists and I are going to be discussing the feeling of trans joy and euphoria as they play role playing games. Euphoria has all of their socials listed below, so please check them out whenever you have a chance. This panel is part of our Pride Month content and is supported by Rune Fable. Now, before we get too far into it, I'm going to introduce myself and our lovely cast. I am Ren, pronouns they, them. I am a Black non binary individual with braids pulled back, and I am wearing a green button down shirt with a lovely dice necklace and a few rings on my hands. I am going to now pitch it across to Nathan.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. I'm your androgynous android, late night DJ Nathan Blades, pronouns he, they. I am a black man with a 70s style afro, blue rectangular glasses, and feeling the Afrofuturist fantasy with a wax print top and blue lips. I design tabletop RPGs and do a lot of actual play work as well. You've probably seen me on the channel before, and it's great to be back. Let's go pass it over to Riley.
Hi, I am Anna or Riley, whichever you prefer. I use they, it pronouns. I am a white non binary person with like a half blonde, half brown kind of mullet. I have large square glasses. I have little like hearts painted on my cheeks and a little dangly flower thing. And I'm wearing a light green, just like Ren kind of button up top with white dungarees. And yeah, Jasmine.
Hey, hi, I'm Yasmin. That's pronouns she, her. I a white trans woman with graying dark hair that comes down in curls over my shoulder. I'm wearing 1930s style high neck blouse and classic Dior Rouge lipstick. And I design RPGs as well as community management. I basically did everything you can do with an RPG from the concept to selling it.
Mhm. Is it actually Dior? Are you in brand today?
Yeah, that's actually Dior. Like that's the color they had in the 40s. It's not a vintage lipstick, but yeah, that's the same make basically.
Amazing.
We are not sponsored by Dior.
But if they want,
I was just I'm just impressed when people genuinely rock brand on things like this. That's amazing. Anyway.
All right. So, as some of our cast have mentioned before, Nathan is a games designer and has been around the TTRPG space. Anna is a comics writer as well as a sensitivity reader, and Jasmine is a community manager. And we are going to take all of their lovely opinions of and experiences of the space, and we're going to ask them some questions. So, to start off with, I we tend to like to get a definition of what we're going to be talking about just so that everyone's on the same page and we all kind of feel similar about it. So, what is trans joy in tabletop role playing games? And if you can, describe a moment when you think you experienced it for the first time during a game.
Sure, let's fire the shot.
Yes, let's
Yeah,
go.
it's interesting because it feels actually quite like all instances of joy in people. It is quite nebulous and on a per person sort of basis. It's interesting when it's in tabletop RPGs, at least in the playing of in a space, because it is separate sometimes from the personal gender euphoria one can have through expression or behavior and so on and so forth. Usually in tabletop RPGs, you are not playing yourself, so there is like an interesting disconnect or sometimes an intentional harmonizing of the kind of character you're playing and exploring themes in who you are as a person. I definitely experienced the idea of realizing that my pronouns were different when I was playing a bunch of he they characters in a row, and then went which While calling that joy is interesting to me because it wasn't me playing a character then being yippee woohoo about it, but there was like an understanding and a realization that was, I think, satisfying. I think trans joy for me in tabletop RPGs is when you are playing with gender expression in a game and it is satisfying and in some ways real. We'll discuss what realness is as we go, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I also agree with the experimentation, I guess, because I'm non-binary, but more specifically, I identify as agender, so I don't have a gender. Kind of is how I view it.
Mhm.
So I love playing non-binary characters in like different kind of variations of like figuring out. Like sometimes they're really feminine, sometimes they're really masculine, sometimes they're kind of like me, and like everything in between. Um, and that is joy for me to be able to even though I don't identify with that, to still like explore that and express that. And recently, a very big part of trans joy that I experienced was when I was at an all non-binary table for a four-shot AP at Panzer's Tables, where the whole, even though the premise was like there's this fascist government you have to overthrow, it was such a kind of like low stakes, really funny game where everyone was playing non-binary characters, and the bad guys were so easy to like kill because you know we all need a win in these times. But what was most important about that was that in game there was a character who we as a all PCs talk to because they found out that they might be non-binary, and we got to have this in character talk about like you know what do you do when you realize you might not be cis? What do you do when you might try pronouns to different names? And that moment where we all got to talk about that in character is something I will just remember forever.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah, like of course the like playing with gender in RPGs can produce joy. Like if you use them right, like TTRPGs can be euphoria machines where you get your dose of gender expression or experimentation or acceptance for the week or whatever when you sit down at a table and you can just inhibit the space, and that's I think something that can produce a lot of joy, but also the culture surrounding TTRPGs for me was very helpful as a gateway into queer communities. Like that's where I met queer people and witnessed other people transition, and so like the especially the indie scene was a place where I like saw people like every other transition, or Catherine Raman just exist, and or Crystal Fraser, also someone who I met early in my basically joining the online scene days, and so that was very helpful to see people exist in this scene I'm also part of, and being accepted, being part of the medium, and also being creators.
Incredible. So it seems like trans joy is more not just an experience that you feel personally, but it's also something that you tend to share with others at the same time. It's a sort of coming together while you explore gender, and sometimes just the feeling of being in community with people while you do that at the same time.
Oh yeah, queerness and community rather are
Mhm.
so incredibly interlinked. I
Mhm.
think, especially because I'm of the personal opinion that like gender and presentation is like a language in that there are signifiers that people express and are understood, and different communities have different understandings of those. But it requires a person on the other end to receive the communication.
Mm.
So being able to kind of express and be understood, I think, is part of the joy. So you need the community to have that operate. And then also, there is so much similar to the idea of an RPG party and a queer found family in both the
Mm.
the composition, the specialized skills of the individuals, and the collective weathering of hardships, that I feel that there is an easy through line to kind of make of those two worlds.
Yeah, and also like if like RPGs, especially the stories that are actually told at the table after the rule system is picked, is a medium where we can create our stories on the same budget as like the most mainstream of mainstream things. And we are for sure the casting directors. Like we pick the characters, how they appear. We can create a representation in our stories. So it's very much on the same level how we as queer people, as trans people, can tell stories about trans characters in these worlds. Like we don't have to be more yeah, like we don't have to hold back because of budget constraints, like we would in movies. We don't need anyone to green light our existence, and that's freeing. So that's a medium that allows a lot of stories to be told that we don't see on the screen or printed on the page.
Excellent. Um, so we've talked about, I think Nathan briefly mentioned like an RPG group being somewhat similar to a queer found family. I'm just wondering, like, in your experiences, the kind of joy that you've experienced now compared to the first times you played an RPG, like,
Mm.
what was that like initially? And was this aspect of joy something that you thought TTRPGs would be able to offer you at all? I mean, as as it's been mentioned, it might not have been a thing that you were expecting to experience in the
Mm.
first place.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like me initially playing tabletop RPGs was like playing GURPS as my first ever tabletop RPG when I was like 16, 17. What a system to start with. There's a reason why I play mostly narrative focused stuff now. And that was all very edgy. We were all cyberpunk fans, like the genre. So there was a lot of that kind of like um I really relish that to not start with a fantasy system because I think that's really colored how I feel about different types of fiction now, and I find cyberpunk to be inherently more queer than fantasy as like a genre to explore. Actually, funnily enough, we'll get into that. But yeah, while there were I think queer players of that group other than me, it was just not a thing that was kind of as actively discussed at the time. Um, Playing these I still play cyberpunk games now, but most more of the table are openly queer, or we're telling act or making the active intent to tell queer stories, not just as the players that we currently are, but the NPCs, and then using systems mechanically to kind of explore queerness, which was vectors that was absolutely not considered when I was 16. So I think time in the hobby and maturity and a willingness to experiment just made the play experience more queer over time, at least for me.
Yeah, I think it was not something I like. I've been well, I was gonna say I've been non-binary since like 16, but that's not true. I was actually like really young when was already saying like I'm not a girl.
Mhm.
But I think the first time I found a word for it, let's put it that way, I was like around 16, and at the time I didn't really know anyone, at least not in my like real life, who was like that. And online I did know some people, but it was not something when I started tabletop games, which was I think in my early 20s maybe, that I even considered to be something that's a part of it. Like I didn't even consider that that's a story you can tell in such a game. And at the time, the tables I was at were people I knew, but I was quite often the only queer person, or if I wasn't the only queer person, I was the only, like trans person. And so it wasn't necessarily that I didn't feel, I guess, safe there. It just didn't come to mind. And then I had a brief like 2 year like gap where I didn't play any games because all the real life games sort of fell out apart and such. Not just scheduling usually. And then, but I remember when I wanted to get back into it, trying to find groups online, I was very nervous because I didn't think like not just because I'm non-binary, also I'm autistic. So I was very much like I'm going to be playing with strangers, and I don't know how they might react to me. And I remember seeing this post somewhere about a Discord server where they had a quote unquote safe space, which was a special area in their server where games would be ran by people who were usually marginalized. And I tried that, and that, even though the campaign itself fell apart, it was a bit of a train wreck. It was still a nice group, and that did make me realize, like, oh, there are queer people here, and that sort of progressed, and then I increasingly got more and more queer tables. I have since then still have been at one or two tables that where I was the only queer person, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that again. Actually, I don't want that. But yeah, not initially something I expected, but happy I found.
Yeah, like I started really young with playing RPGs. I transitioned pretty late in my early 30s, so that there was like a 20-year gap of playing RPGs without, being openly queer. But yeah, it created at least an emotional understanding for me playing there. And yeah, I played a lot of genres that work for queer people. Cyberpunk, like for me, it was Shadowrun was one of the games that gave me a lot of it too, and like Monster Hearts and more explicitly queer indies also helped to give me a framework. And when it came to the point where I was questioning my gender, it helped communicating with my friends. Like one of my friends, when I talked with her about it, said that I seemed like when I was playing female characters, they seemed more like my actual self, and also I seemed happier playing them. And so that was like one of those you could have known conversations that needed a few months to work within me before I actually transitioned. And my name Yasmin is slightly inspired by one of the characters I played because like I when it came to picking a name, I put a lot of names on the list, and names of characters went on there because I was already used to being called that name and reacting, and so that's what was the like. It is totally detached from being associated with the character. It's my own name now, but like that's the origin story how it got on the list, and yeah, I'm happy with that name and how playing TTRPGs grew into that part of my identity as well.
Can I say I have a similar story to how I came to the name Riley? It wasn't a tabletop game, but I have OCs outside of tabletop games, and one of them was called Riley. And I remember at the time tweeting like, "Oh, like it's I don't even want." I was in a mood. And I was thinking like, "Oh, I like if I was a trans guy and like translation, I would probably be Riley." Because at the time, like I like Anna. That's my birth name. I like it. I can't have two names, right? And so I posted that, and my friend, who I love dearly, commented on that like, you can have both. And I was like, huh, yeah, maybe I could. So I have
Okay,
a
no
similar where
was dos.
yeah, exactly. So I have a similar where I named an OC that, and then it was like, I like that name a little bit too much. I want to have it.
This is really good tech. Interesting. I mean, I'm happy with my given name currently. Who knows? Time changes everybody in various ways, but the idea that I could be called Keats or Cirrus or
Just add a second
Phoenicia
name.
is
Join
genuine.
me.
True. Let's add an additional middle name. Let's go.
Oh my god, incredible. So it seems that I think myself it's a bit similar. It wasn't anything that I was thinking of initially, and it seems that everyone like had that initially. Like I'm playing the game to play the game, and then as I go through this process of sometimes playing the game process, sometimes of discovering myself, then it becomes more reflected in the games that I play. And maybe sometimes the experience gets a bit more curated because you want to play more things like this as well. So Yasmin, you kind of were talking about getting to play these characters because they're not really a part of like the blockbuster movies that we get to see. We get to like have our own like fantasies or dark edgy stories or whatever with these people as the main characters. So do you find it difficult when telling stories of trans or non-binary characters to have them experiencing hardships? Do you feel a responsibility to reduce portrayals of harm done to trans characters in the media? Does that limit what stories you tell?
Oh, I had a really interesting conversation about this recently with people.
Hmm.
Because I said a lot of games that I join automatically have transphobia as a line, which I understand those games are absolutely needed where you can just be like Jasmine earlier said, just, we don't need to be green lit kind of, right? But I was also saying sometimes that feels like I don't get to kind of fully show what it's like living, I guess, being trans, where you go out, like if I go out now and strangers will look at me, they will call me miss, ma'am, they will misgender me all the time. And that's, that's my reality. And while it's nice in games to have breaks from that, I also sometimes just want to like
Mm.
show stuff like that. I want to have the difficult conversations in character with people where my character might talk about their gender dysphoria, talk about what it's like, how they get treated sometimes. And I feel like there should be like a balance where on one hand we should have really kind of like euphoric games where we get to celebrate and express our transness and have all those kind of lovely things. Well, on the other hand, I also think it's nice sometimes with a table that you trust, where everyone's on the same page. You've talked about it before, and that's very important. Everyone needs to feel safe. Have these conversations in character, or even if it's little bits. Like I don't need my non-binary character to be misgendered by every NPC they come across. But sometimes have these little expressions where you show like, yeah, this is also the other part of it. And that's personally how I feel about it. I like having both, but I do like it when there's space for that.
Yeah, I think it depends on like context, medium, if there's an audience, if I do it. Like as a designer or if I play on a stream, then that's a different consideration. Like what do I want to represent to an audience? And otherwise it's basically the group deciding if they want to make this like a big part of the game, and also the kind of suffering for them. Like are we replicating like transmisia from the real world into into a fantasy world, or just replaying it, or are we like letting them suffer in a different way? What is the context here? And I played games that are very much about queer characters like having not a really good time, like Midnight at Oasis, for example, which is about the 1990s cross-dressing scene where it's in a bar and every character like is some way in the closet and struggling with dysphoria or attractions, and like that's a game that isn't about you know full on queer joy. It's also about all the struggles that existed, but like that's not what my default is. Basically I don't want to tell all queer stories from the standpoint of suffering or coming out like mainstream media do. I want to have like a broader yeah window of
Hmm.
possibility for stories.
Hmm. Uh, I definitely, because so much of my role playing stuff is via actual play, where uh even though I'm being aware that a large chunk of my audience share is queer, and I do not want to go and accidentally trigger them or drive them away from the thing I'm working on by hitting something that cuts like super close to the bone. I would be reluctant to kind of do that as one of a broader project unless I kind of went in with that as the kind of like top line, like, oh, we're going to be handling some heavy stuff. On the flip side of it, though, the I am not especially one to play the respectability politics game when it comes to my queer and trans characters, though. Let trans characters be mediocre or terrible people. Let them be villains in a way that is entirely separate to the Disney canon of queer coding. I'll do that all the time because I think that when so much of the cast are broad of minority backgrounds and genders and sexualities is not tokenizing to have one of them be shitty. So I love doing that. But I don't know whether I've not necessarily directly gone into a game with the intent to explore real world transness and the difficulties therein as part of actual play. But exploring it in metaphor is something that I think is can sometimes be broadly easier to kind of like dip your toe into. Everybody being familiar with the way that like X-Men works of mutants as a metaphor for a broad range of minority rights and how that kind of works therein. Exploring that in games I like doing a lot. I'll probably talk about it a couple times across this interview, but the one of the games I'm working on at the moment, City of Espers, is about found families of psychics who have all left their previous communities for being aggrieved due to awakening to psychic powers and finding new found family that way. So that's a way of kind of exploring difficulties with discrimination without trying to directly apply it to what might be a real world traumatic experience for a person. And I like exploring that. It would be interesting, I think, to kind of have a project on the ground floor where the degree of handling difficult social experiences with gender and sexuality was like an intended thing with the play group and how they would explore that. That would be an interesting future project.
Yeah. So it seems like, oh well, I guess it's the bridge of fantasy versus reality. Some people tend to use TTRPGs exclusively for escapism purposes, and so
Mm,
they really just want that declared barrier between the things that they would experience in real life versus the things that they want to experience in the fantasy game. But depending on the group that you have and what you sit down and discuss at the beginning, then either in actuality or through allegory, you might want to explore this. Because some people, TTRPGs are not therapy, but some people
Yeah.
do tend to use them as a sort of play scheme in like situational practice for like, because there are some scenarios that will never come up in your life, but there are some like very mundane scenarios that happen in TTRPGs that might actually help you in a way that role playing in general helps you. So
mhm.
I suppose it really depends.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me as well. Where when I have those games where I would like to have some pushback sometimes for characters, or like, where I'm thinking like it doesn't make sense that any character or any NPC I come across automatically knows that my character's pronouns are they them, right? I love sometimes in situations. It's not necessarily about the reality of it. It's sometimes also about like reacting to it in a way I wouldn't in real life. Like if I have a character who is really outspoken and has like a lot of guts, I'm someone who usually sort of lets it pass by because I don't have the energy for it. But sometimes it's nice in character if your character gets misgendered to just shout at the other person's face, for example, right?
Mm,
And I think that's sometimes also it for me where I can explore those like dysphoria, more uncomfortable themes through a different lens and try and see okay how would this character approach that? And that in itself can also be an escapism in a way, I think, for me. And yeah, TTRP is not a therapy, but it is therapeutic sometimes, and it is in these instances for me as well.
mhm. I want to quickly mention a book that I read relatively recently. It's maybe an anti-recommendation, but still, I think it's worth mentioning here. A book called "They Came to Slay: The Queer Culture of D&D." Is it comes in very open-heartedly. It's kind of thesis statement. It's like, did you know that if you play Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons, you can be gay, and that's neat sometimes. Which is a very entry level discussion of this concept. But it was very interesting to kind of read an external experience about this kind of thing because there were bits and pieces of this that lined up with my own personal experience. And the idea is in this section in there about the idea of playing as a different gender to your current one as a process of discovery and kind of therapy and the dice rolling. But it didn't really go into the fact that there's a lot of emotional labor that can be done with that if you're not doing that in a way that's happy and healthy. That it does not talk about a single other tabletop RPG at all, other than Dungeons and Dragons, which was kind of like, wow, that's It'd blow your mind to play
What do you
any
mean? There's
game.
only
Listen,
one. There's only one, right?
There's
Only
only
sometimes
one
one
that's
tabletop
game.
all
game.
they know.
Mhm.
That might just be
Um,
all they know.
but I think it would be a genuinely interesting thing to read if you were like 15 and have only ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons and wanted to explore the conceit. But I guess it's cool that it's a concept that is slowly being well understood enough of the gender euphoria or sexuality discovery euphoria that there could be a tiny, slightly mediocre book about it. That the road is clear and opening.
Okay. Um, I will take your anti recommendation and not read it. So let's talk about, like, we mentioned briefly, like, finding others like ourselves as we go along and play these games. Do you find that even with current inclusivity and diversity initiatives, and I guess this is more for like looking for groups, or like you are in an actual play, things like that, when people are trying to get people together within the larger tabletop scene, and also some established groups, that are maybe more popular and more known. In the larger tabletop scene, the trans non-binary representation, do you find it insufficient, and are trans people still underrepresented? This is a question I can answer myself, but I'm asking you what your opinion is.
I think in the I wouldn't say it's adequate, but I feel like in the AP space there's definitely a lot more of us. Whereas outside of that, I've seen a lot of like tables where there are queer people, but like if I were to join, I would be the only trans person at the table, kind of.
Hmm.
And I do think, like, having recently been at that all non-binary table, I would love to see more of that, whether or not it includes me, or like, all trans women table, like an all, like, yeah, like, or like just any kind of, because gender is so diverse. And I would love to see, I guess, more tables that are just very loudly trans.
Mhm.
Because I think you can create some really interesting stories with that as well. But yeah, to answer the question, AP space doing a lot better. Outside of that, I don't think it's quite there yet.
Hmm.
Yeah, like internationally, and especially in the English language spaces, I think we are seeing a lot of representation, nods towards RPGs being a queer hobby in some sense. Like Dimension 20 are a big part of the uh, AP space, and they do include queer people regularly. And yeah, like I think there, there is a presence. It's a noticeable presence, especially in the big players and in yeah, like networks like Euphoria, who are dedicated to representation. It's not like I would like to see more. I would like to see more queer games and topics explored, but that's me. But I think my taste should be catered to. So there's that, and then there is the German scene, which is like, it seems years behind. There
Hmm.
are very few like uh, there are very few big let's play things in general, and then there are a few trans people. On the other hand, queerness seems to be way more represented than, for example, BIPOC or disability. It's I, I'm like it's more likely that I see a conventionally attractive trans woman as the one token person at a table than, like, for example, seeing two black people on the same German channel. Like,
Hmm.
one is a surprise. So, like, the German RPG scene, I think, should do more to be to get with the international vibe of TTRPG getting more diverse as a, yeah, like, as a medium consumed by an audience, like in the AP
Hmm.
spaces. or in the panel spaces. That's where the German scene has to, basically step up. Otherwise, each country has the demographics it has, but like we still kind of need to be better in creating representation and like comparing English language content to German language content. The German always falls a bit short of representation with very few exceptions.
Yeah, same for the Dutch space. I recognize very much what you're saying. The Dutch space is not nearly there.
Gotcha. Yeah. And like, good point made by both of you in the space that my perspective on this would obviously be informed by the English-speaking global West, as it were. But at least from my side of things, it seems that tabletop RPGs have gone in the same similar space to Magic the Gathering and Warhammer, and that there are a lot of white men who had their eggs cracked over time. And so as a result, there are a lot more trans people in the space as a result of that kind of like upwards trending graph over time. I don't, and especially since a lot of my work is, or the role playing that I do is in an actual play space or in a local space where I keep my friendship community work well curated, I suppose, where I would not struggle to fill a table of queer and trans people particularly easily. Finding other black tabletop RPG people, on the other hand, is much more difficult. And queer black people as well, interestingly. So there's kind of like an intersectional section of that, but I'm glad that over time there has been in nerd hobbies across the board people understanding that there is language to the way that they feel about their sexuality and gender, and as a result there is a wider representation of them. Because even in the 90s, technically all of those queer and trans people were already there. Nobody just knew that yet, or they just didn't have the words for it. So it's cool to kind of see that open. But in terms of the kind of whether that applies internationally and whether that applies the moment that you're not necessarily in an incredibly online space is definitely different.
Yeah, I'm one of those people whose act cracked when already out in public. As a TTRPG person, I was like the community manager for the biggest publisher at the time in Germany, and like a designer on big game lines. And then I transitioned publicly, and so that was like a cracking moment for a few other people. So like it certainly was a moment of pure joy for me to basically have a public coming out that was accepted well by the community as a whole. So like to not only put down the German community, they were very accepting when they actually saw a coming out happening, and are the mostly still are accepting of me, even if the novelty wore off after a few years.
I find that so interesting, just bringing up, like, because intersectionality, there's neurodivergence, there's race and sex and all of these things that we have to consider when we're talking about like diversity and inclusion. And sometimes people might be looking for one thing or another and just think, oh, we got one, that's fine. But it's really something to be like aware of and take into consideration, because you can very much end up tokenizing people, or you end up looking for someone that ticks multiple of the boxes and you're like, great, we don't need any more, they're this and this, perfect. But let me not get off track. Uh, Yasmin, you mentioned community, being a community manager for a very big publisher at the time. So I actually want to go to you for a moment. What have you found as a community manager to be some successful measures that groups or organizations can take to create positive spaces for trans people and creatives? You mentioned people were very happy when you came out.
Yeah,
So,
like they were happy for me, because like having examples there, like not hiding your trans people, but putting them out there, give them roles that are audience facing if they're up to it, and if the audience is like you can't teach a toxic audience to be tolerant by putting one trans person in there and having them deal with all the hate. That's not how it
Mm.
goes. But like creating a space where they are part of the face of your community, like you can't overlook this is a place where trans people are welcome, and also where trans people are in a position to kind of curate the room, like give them the power to set boundaries and create a place that works well for them. Like you can always have like a few trans people who can deal with a very cis-normative place where there are lots of questions get asked, like nobody cares for inclusive language. A lot of trans people can thrive in spaces like that because it's not like the main thing they're dealing with right now. But if you want to have have trans joy as part of your community, you must have like a culture that celebrates this, that is respectful, that where more privileged people are able and willing to teach basics, like where you like the where just coming out doesn't make you like the default one person who has to explain their existence to everyone and correct every mistake, or otherwise it will like people will shrug and think, yeah, she didn't correct them, now it's okay. So like have like you need to have a community that is self-moderating in some way. So and that might mean that you initially teach some people how it works, but you can't be you can't do everything one-on-one if you are doing it in a big community, but you have to do it for some people and demonstrate how it works in some ways. But yeah, like if you are a community manager for a bigger space, or if you are like uh, the most prominent trans person in a bigger space, you basically become a queer elder by default. Like there is little room to experiment there. Like you don't experiment in communities that are basically that aren't queer communities. Like that's not the space, especially if you are like the one representing this moment, and you are like you're kind of a representative, and but you aren't you don't have to be everybody's you know the teacher, and you don't have to be
Mm.
everybody's trans mom. You can be a trans influencer and just show them how it's done. And you don't need to create parasocial relationships with every queer person on your server in your
Mhm.
that's your reader. Like you keep your distance and work by example, be approachable, but yeah, keep a space for yourself to for all the drama and experimentation of coming out. And um, if you can create these spaces within your community, like a sub community, like a deeper layer, and connect the queer people in your space, that's great. But if it's like a community that isn't about being queer, but you want to have a lot of queer people in there, it's more about showing that they are there, and as a community manager, highlighting people whose opinions are the ones that matter in this moment. Like I wouldn't talk over, for example, Riley, if it's a non-binary issue and how pronouns should be handled. Like if it wants to handle this a certain way, I as a moderator would have its back, and not you know go by my own standards there. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
um yeah, some like awareness philosophy where you go, if harm is done, you go victim first and assess their needs, not
Mhm.
and then you assess the community needs and also the perpetrators needs, and then you find a decision. But you have to take into consideration what the people who are actually were harmed here want things to be handled. And that's it's more work, it's more emotional labor, but that is basically what community managers do if they are creating spaces.
Mhm.
Ooh. So it's important to have someone, well, not just one person, but like have trans, non-binary people at the forefront, but don't place the burden of work on them to be the only person that's doing any of the allyship work that can be distributed, but also to not just overtake a conversation where their voice might not be needed. So just being aware
Mhm.
of the situation. Okay.
Mhm.
So, Nathan,
Mhm.
you mentioned before you had a game. What was it? City of Espers?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So you mentioned kind of exploring things through metaphor. So, as a game designer, have TTRPGs really allowed you an opportunity to explore your relationship to gender in a way that you haven't thought previously of? Are there specific mechanics or storytelling? Mechanics that you find aid in more inclusive storytelling?
There's a handful of things here that we'll explore, but we'll go through them quickly. One, looping back to what I was saying about kind of like fantasy versus cyberpunk, I kind of started playing cyberpunk as a genre in a lot of my tabletop RPGs, and I've never really liked fantasy as a genre that much.
Mhm.
I was never one of those Tolkien girlies back in the day, you know? But I think one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed cyberpunk as a genre from a queer and trans perspective is that uh, as a genre and then thereby the mechanics that explore that genre, there seem to be, at least for me, far more opportunities to explore queerness and gender. There is something about it being a modern setting where the idea of body modification and body hacking is so commonplace, and there is I think a more palpable for me euphoria in uh exploring that, of rebuilding yourself to the body that you truly want, piece by piece, in a way that isn't really felt when it is a magical potion or just a separate abstracted idea. But then there's also the fact that because cyberpunk is very much in a high tech, low life way, and there's lots of real life complexities that need to be handled alongside the changing of the self, also feels really real and is quite palpable. And working as a community to be able to survive that, I feel, is quite real. Um, and that does reflect in a lot of the games that I write. I would say that every game that I've written is textually queer, even if there is no rule about who is kissing who. I think a lot of the early this is a queer tabletop RPG writ large games focus on the romantic side of queerness and gender, which is important and I think definitely groundbreaking at the time that those games were released. But there is so much about the broader queer experience that isn't just the romance, that isn't often explored. And I really pride myself on being actively interested in exploring those facets. So, for City of Espers specifically, the players in it are members of a house, like a ballroom house, as it were, of psychics who get up to kind of fun sports battles against other psychics. But there's also the trials and tribulations of what it means to organize a community, and whether the community's problems, even internally, when you all align. When you have a really strong in the game mechanics, there is the concept of turf, the psychic, TURF to be clear. The community psychic resonance of your house is so strong, the city itself speaks back to you and shapes itself in your image over time. And there is a back and forth between how the city reflects how you feel, and when there's complications with one, complications with the other, which I think is a fun thing to explore as a game and as a story, as an urban fantasy thing, but also has such strong thematic relevancies to what it means to keep a queer community thriving and the people that are in it, that I feel is really exciting to kind of explore from like a gender perspective and stuff as well. So it's those bits and pieces, games where you get to reinvent yourself over time and have parts where you get to change out your character sheet with new things as how you understand yourself changes. If you've ever played City of Mist, which is not a game that I have made but I've written for, that has all like playbooks in them that change as your character changes, and that uh no fixed point under which you are truly a complete person, but as you grow and understand yourself, the way that your character works also changes, I think is phenomenal. And I wish more games let you do that.
Oh, nice. I've never played City of Mist. I feel like I might need to, because that aspect of parts of your character changing out is very interesting to me.
To be clear, there's a handful of games that use the same mechanics but are written by the
Mhm,
same people. City of
mhm.
Mist was the first, and there's been variants. Queers with a Z and exclamation mark, named after a comic book of the same name, is specifically about being queer superheroes, so adapts to that core mechanic of your identities flipping really palpably. Metro Otherscape, which is the one that I've written for, to be clear, I wasn't involved in the original City of Mist, is that, but cyberpunk. So yeah, you can kind of pick your genre poison as well as being able to explore the kind of identity flipping as you go. Yeah.
So cool. Okay. Um, Riley. So you've done sensitivity reading for TTRPGs. Um, what are some common missteps that you've seen designers take with regards to representation in their projects? And what are some key things you think creators should be mindful of when they're devising new works?
I think it's mainly three kind of major problems. The one is that we don't exist at all. In the sense that, and the way I usually see it reflected the most is that I feel like a lot of old TTRPG books would have just referred to GM and players as he by default pronoun. And some people now try and compensate by flipping between he and she constantly in the text. And it always just, I don't know. I'm just like, there is an easier way to do this. They.
Mhm.
Not only is that easier because you don't have to constantly flip, but it's also more inclusive because it's neutral and you include everyone. That's a really big one that I see a lot. Then there is the one when being non-binary specifically is seen as a third gender rather than what it is, which is outside of the binary gender spectrum, and that is just everywhere. Like I see it as this sort of vastness of space outside of like two planets, if you will. That's sort of how I imagine it in my mind. And the way that usually comes forward is that people will make like non-binary characters that are like androgynous. They're like right in the middle between two things. I think I saw a thing that my partner's really into Warhammer, and I don't know if this was the intention, but I remember there was something that she showed me where there were these, I guess, soldiers that had only one boob because they were sort of like, I
The
think they were
Slanesh,
originally.
yes. Yeah,
And
where
I
they
was like,
are
interesting.
weirdly. This is how we display intersex in a
Yeah, yeah,
miniature
yeah.
that is an inch high. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was like, okay, interesting choice. But that's the thing where we're seeing that third gender and specifically as a neutral one rather than being a broad spectrum that can be anything. And then there's the opposite of that I don't really have an issue with, but it becomes an issue when that's the only thing where the non-binary person is like an android or an alien. Which, as someone who has said that for me, like my gender feels closer to an object, hence the it pronoun, than like a human thing. I can identify with that to a degree, but when that's your only representation of being non-binary in an entire setting, then I'm like, okay, so in my head, then I'm like, okay, but I always ask designers, but why did you make that choice? Like, why is there no other NPC that's non-binary? Why is it only the android? Why is it only the aliens, for example? Um, I think those are the main three things. As far as trans people in general go, I feel like I see a lot of well, I say I see a lot of. It doesn't happen a lot when I see them, and when I see them, they're often already like fully transitioned. I rarely see characters that are at the start of their transition, and this goes not just for tabletop projects. I also do sensitivity reading for all kinds of other stuff, manuscripts, comics, that kind of things. But those are, I think, the main things that I usually see. So for designers specifically, it's always good to kind of first of all ask, do I have trans people at all in my game or non-binary people? If not, fix that. And if you do, what's your perception on like how are you portraying them, and is that an accurate like portrayal? How many trans people do you know in your life, or are you just going by what you might have heard or seen rather than actually talking to people who are actually following content of certain creators who are educating or that, I think that's the main tip to look at your content and think about the choices that you made and if they make sense.
Yeah, if I can, like, just one quick tip as a sensitivity reader, like, consider there are things like trans joy, like that. This is
Yes.
like that, like it's not a tragedy that happens to characters, but they're, it's
Yes, I was gonna. I was because I know that we're like running out of time. So but that's definitely a thing. I also always go like, why is this a tragedy? Like, so yeah, I agree.
Um, yeah, it is. I guess because I only operate in certain circles, I don't come across as much as you would, like coming into something that's currently in progress before it's been touched by a sensitivity reader, which is why it's important to have people like that. If you don't have trans people in your life, you need to consult people, and not just for, I mean, this goes across the spectrum of disability, of race, of all of these different intersections of marginalization that exist in our world. You need to talk to people about the thing that you want to write about. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we are coming to the end here, but I do want to ask one more question to our lovely panel before I have them give their outros and we sign off for the evening. For anyone who is in the process of discovering their identity, or who have maybe had less than welcoming experiences in the TTRPG space, what are one or two pieces of advice or encouragement that you would want to share with them?
I think that you're not obligated to stay at a table that you're not comfortable at. If you feel like your gender, if you feel like your gender or your journey of exploring that is not being respected, even if they are your friends, that you should be enjoying playing that game. And if you're not, then maybe you should go elsewhere, because there are tables out there that will gladly have you. As for exploring, I think just make as many different characters as you can possibly think of that go into the direction of where you might be leaning. And if you're not sure, then just try all kinds of different things and sort of try and figure out, why do you like that, until I think from what I've heard here as well, until someday something clicks. um and also don't be afraid to experiment. Like, you don't have to. If you change your pronouns and you later don't like them, you just drop them, you try something else. It's not, or like same go with names. Go through 15 different names if you want to until you find the one. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no end state. We are constantly changing as bodies. The
Yes.
way that our cells grow and die mean that we are functionally a different person every 7 years. So why assume that there is a static endpoint ever? Um, Experiment, play lots of different things with lots of different people. That isn't just a gender sexuality thing. That's just a media literacy and broadening your horizons thing. Play lots of different things and learn by playing with lots of different people. If you want to explore real talk, if you want to explore the things about your own identity within a game, read up about the concept of bleed and how it can be good and bad for you and others at your table. It can be real messy if you put a lot of yourself into a character in a game and then a bad thing happens to them, because that's how the game works. And you don't need to do that to yourself in the name of gender exploration. Please find a
Really
way to
good
go and
point. Yes.
explore this sensibly, insanely with the people that you care about.
yeah. I would probably, like, if you feel unwelcome in the TTRPG space, or if you are struggling with how can I be queer in my TTRPG space, probably not necessarily the people watching this, they know there is a queer scene out there, but you
Mhm.
know, like, gamer is not the identity you should focus on retaining. If you can get rid of your gender assigned at birth, you can rid of being a gamer as well, and just play TTRPGs as queer people. It's a good way to make queer friends. Like, you don't have to stay in a place that doesn't tolerate or accept you, just to have a hobby that's shared by a lot of queer people who are like, or who are willing to learn a game. Like, play the game with queer people and enjoy, I would say.
Well, thank you all so much. Once again, we have been here on Euphoria during Pride Month. This has been Trans Joy in TTRPGs. Again, all the Euphoria socials are listed below, so I'm sure this will be available later on if you missed it or came in late. Back to my lovely panelists. I'm going to have them reintroduce themselves, plug all their socials, and say where you can find them. And we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Yasmin.
Yeah, hi or bye. I'm Yasmin. Yeah, you can find my game design mostly at Plot Bunny Games these days. Uh, like where I do a lot of work with Andrea Rick, who's a publisher and designer of queer games in Germany. Shout out there. If it's possible, I will just put my link tree with all the socials in the chat.
They're doing it. They're doing it in the chat. Don't
It's
worry.
happening.
Great, great. And then, yeah, like mostly on Blue Sky. If you want to follow me on social media, where I post about weird queer history and also sometimes TTRPG stuff.
Excellent. Riley.
Hi, I'm Anna or Riley, whichever you prefer. I use they it pronouns and I'm definitely human. You can find me pretty much everywhere at Peculiar Planets. I'm on pretty much every social media. Also, my website, peculiarplanets.com, where you can find more about my work. I write comics, I write tabletop stuff, I do sensitivity reading, and I do actual plays. Some of those actual plays are Dumble True, a podcast, a Pathfinder 2E podcast, where I play also a very queer character. Episodes drop on Tuesday. And I'm often over at Pan's Tables with Dark Waters, where I also play a non-binary character who has had a lot of good in-character conversations. And also, they are running their Pride event next week, a 52-hour charity event benefiting PFLAG. And I'll be running Game 8, but also be playing in Game 1. It's Game 1's Friday, Game 8 somewhere on so that you can go to the social and find it. It's great. Come in. They have lots of giveaways. You don't even have to donate. You can participate. But yeah, that's all I have to plug. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
And Nathan.
Hi. If you didn't already know, I am your androgynous android late night DJ, Nathan Blades, tabletop RPG designer, streamer, voice actor, and general internet ne'er-do-well. You can catch me as the voice of Captain Oromar Vale on the Campaign Skyjacks podcast. You can check out the actual play streams that I do at twitch.tv/the Neoncaster. And you can also play my tabletop RPGs, including Heartbeats and Perfect Sync, on theneoncaster.itch.io. If you'd like to find out more about City of Espers, we're going to be talking a lot about that at a handful of different conventions coming on this year. You can catch me at Gen Con the start of August, at Thought Bubble at the start of November, and at Dragon Meet in London at the end of November, at which I will have preview copies of City of Espers for people to have a thumb through, which I'm very excited to show people. Thank you very much for having me on.
Lovely. I have been your host, Ren. You can find me at Mask Ren on the socials. I am a TTRPG actual play performer, cosplayer, and I just float around the space doing stuff like this. So thank you so much again for tuning in, and we will see you all later.
Farewell,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.